So very quickly, I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about the mandate of the PBO, and I'm going to get into this whole infrastructure program, the new infrastructure plan, and how the heck do you actually try to measure performance around something like this, and explain it to Parliament and a parliamentary committee. So just by way of background, because I understand there's still some uncertainty about what we do, we provide advice to Parliament as a whole. So we don't work for a party, we don't work for an MP, but MPs and parties and committees, not parties, but committees can ask us to do work, and any work related to the economic or fiscal situation of Canada, anything within the purview of Parliament from a financial or costing perspective, we can be asked to undertake. So we've done a variety of things. We do a regular piece on economic analysis and fiscal analysis. So every 6 months, we publish a fiscal update, basically an outlook as to Canada's fiscal situation. We do once a year a fiscal sustainability report, which will be coming out this year in July, and effectively that's like a 70-year horizon looking forward, assuming no policy changes between now and then. What does our fiscal situation look like at the national and provincial levels? We've done interesting pieces on fighter jets. We've done some work on criminal justice. We've done work on contaminated sites. We have a piece coming out next week on the cost of some of these naval ships that the government is considering purchasing. So quite a variety of things. And a really interesting piece I'm looking at right now is what we call the budget sufficiency of the wastewater strategy being undertaken by the government. And really what is looking at costing I like to call them outcomes, the outcomes that are being sought, in this case, reducing boil water advisories, looking at the inputs required to get to that point, costing those inputs and processes, developing the financial model, and then projecting that forward and comparing that to what we know has been set aside in the budget. So I see somebody yawning over there. It's really exciting work, I promise you. It really is. But it's more exciting to talk about it when it's here. So that's really what we do. So what is the the new infrastructure plan? And this is what this is. And I want to start off by saying, this wasn't a project that I signed up for willingly. This was something that happened when my boss came into my office and said, infrastructure is going to be big. I want something on infrastructure. And I said, there's nothing to measure except money, and we can't even measure the money. So we know what the fiscal impact is. It's been spelled out. So what do we measure? And we came up with an answer, obviously, but I'm going to leave that one with you because we measured on this report a very small component. We measured economic impact or risks to economic impact. But there are a whole bunch of other things we can talk about, and I'm going to leave that with you. So the first thing that we do when we look at a project is, okay, what is this thing? So luckily, because I've been at PBO now for 8 years, I can't believe I've been there that long, but it is a lot of fun. In 2009 with the stimulus fund, I did something similar. And so the first step we do is, what is this thing that we're trying to measure? Let's get our arms around it. And that's what this thing is. It's 186 and change. The numbers are modified a little bit. Short-term piece and a long-term piece. 48 individual budget measures. Okay, so this is where it gets complicated. Being delivered by 32 different departments. So last time around, I was only worried about one department on a $4 billion measure. The next step was really to try to explain this whole idea to a Senate committee who was very, very keen. And by the way, Parliament is, from my experience, Parliament is very keen on performance information. They really want to know how things are working and the impacts. So don't think you're doing this in a vacuum. There really is an appetite for this out there. What we found, there really isn't anything in the budget document or in any of the policy discussions around how to measure this initiative. And this is a significant economic initiative from this government. It's not a couple $2 billion. It's a lot of money, and it's a key plank of their economic platform. So, we're kind of hoping, and we know that there are things in the works, and Matthew mentioned a little bit of that yesterday, and I've talked to some other folks. There are things in the works to how to measure the impact of this thing. Okay, but I'm keep putting it out to you. How would you measure the impact of the performance? So where we landed was, let's give Parliament at least a starting point. What does this thing look like? And we're going to measure, what did I say here? Yeah, timing. So it's the same sort of thing we did in 2009. We said the first phase, the objective is to generate economic activity. So we don't have a lot of other ways to measure that. So what we use as a proxy for economic activity is cash flowing out. So if there's money being pumped into the economy, we can assume, it's a big assumption, we can assume that money is being spent, people are being employed, equipment is being bought, that sort of thing, and there is economic activity happening. So we use cash flow as a proxy for economic activity. We looked at all the different programs that fit within this NIP umbrella. We asked departments to tell us what projects they've identified for the use of this money, because it is infrastructure. So normally infrastructure is projects, and that's not entirely true with this program, but I'll get to that. And what is the ability of this piece of this plan to meet some of these economic objectives? And really, our question that we always try to ask ourselves is, if Parliament looks at a proposal, what do they need to know when they approve it or not approve it? So we did that with the war in Afghanistan when we first started. We said, okay, Parliament, there's a peace coming. You're asked to approve another 1,000 soldiers. Here's what the incremental cost could be on the 1,000 soldiers. So at least you're giving Parliament some decision-making information with which they can hold the government to account. That's their role. Okay, so question to Parliament, if you were to approve something similar, and this is the question we asked them back in 2010, and this was the conclusion we came, if you're asked to approve something like this, when can you see the economic impact happening roughly? Okay, so like I said, we adopted a follow the money theme. That's why the paper was titled Follow the Money. Couldn't think of anything more creative than that. Took a long time to collect. There's 8,600 projects in the pipeline. A bunch of different fields for the projects, which I'm hoping down the road we can use for further analytics around performance. Let you in on a secret. Most of those 32 departments don't really have infrastructure projects. Most of the money is being used for regular standard programming, housing on reserve, subsidies for rental, low-cost accommodation, health and education initiatives. All those programs have been around for quite some time, but this government in Budget 2016 wrapped them up into a new infrastructure plan and laid them out in that fashion. So getting departments to submit information has been a challenge because, as I said, most of them don't collect it on that basis. Infrastructure Canada does, but really the others don't as much. It's quite variable. So it took a long time to get some decent data. This is sort of a sense, so I'm pretend you're a senator or an MP, and somebody's telling you, here, we've got this NIP, it's $186 billion, and you say, well, show me how it works. And show me how that money flows and how it's going to impact my constituents, because that's really what they're interested in. So this is some of the gyrations you have to go through as a parliamentarian. Now, luckily, I've spent a little time at TBS, so I understand a bit how the system works, and I have some people there who are very cooperative and helpful and let me in on some of these things. But this is what you're trying to pull apart, right? You're saying, okay, we got a budget theme, we got a budget initiative, we have minor themes, we have departments, we have departmental programs, we have, PA codes, we have projects within those. It's a dog's breakfast. And to make sense of that to an MP or to a senator is a bit of work. So I say that, only keep that in mind as you're, I know you don't have a lot of necessary control over what finally comes out, because you are there to support a minister, but keep in mind that MPs are interested, and the more you can do to dissect this into kind of a simple way to follow the money, follow the performance, follow the process, certainly they'll be happier. So NIP, what does it include? Capital renewal and refurbishment, but it's called Accelerating Federal Infrastructure Investment. So really fixing rust out. I don't remember how many departments offhand, 28 I think, that have some money in that respect. As I mentioned before, existing transfer payment programs. And then we have some new stuff, investing in green infrastructure, water, wastewater, public transit. So those are new initiatives, and they are funding not necessarily new programs, but more of, so there's more public transit funding under this than there has been in the past. And there's more green wastewater infrastructure type of funding than there has been in the past. But it is a marketing term. So infrastructure is now used to cover a wider variety of things than it might have been in the past. Okay, so tracking timeliness, some of the things we looked at. Department X receives a bunch of money, but they've only identified, something less than what was given to them. So where's the balance going? It does shed a light on, and I have some charts I'll show in a second. Some of the summary here. So capital refurbishment, i.e. the money that departments have the most control over, was the money that they were able to get out the door quickest because it's their own assets, their own capital that they are refurbishing. So generally they were able to report quite well on that stuff, and you'd kind of hope they would. It is their capital. And obviously, in service delivery departments, you saw a little bit better, more discrete, sophisticated reporting than some of the other departments, and that would make sense because this is part of the routine, regular business. And I imagine a lot of you might be kind of scrambling to get together some performance information under the new delivery results unit. Well, it's evident in the quality of the data that's coming back to us that some departments just are better prepared than others, and that's normal. Transfer programs or projects, such as the economic development agencies. A lot of those come in waves, so they're application-based programs. The department might receive a whole bunch of applications, and then they need time to weed through them and approve them, so you'll get batches of data coming through that way. And in many cases, we're not seeing, so these are the sorts of things that basically I need to stand in front of a Senate committee and explain. Why are we seeing discrepancies? Why do we have money not allocated? Why can we not know anything about some of these confidential programs? Well, the confidential programs are effectively programs or projects that just haven't yet been announced. So from a political point of view, the governing party usually likes to have the ability to announce projects before everybody else does, and that's perfectly normal. However, that last line is really telling. There is no progress data at the moment. So we've been into this for over a year, and we have no progress data. We have 8,600 projects. When I've asked departments to tell me how many projects have actually started, there are about 250 where they actually have start dates for them. Real start dates, not planned start dates. So what does that mean to an opposition MP? That means the plan's not working, right? To a PBO person who's got to represent this to Parliament, it is the data's not there. So something to keep in mind. So a couple of quick cuts of the database. Top 4 recipients by, we call the value of the allocation. And so the red line is how much they got in budget 2016 over a 2-year period. The blue line is how much they've identified in project value. Okay, so you can see a sense. ISED has actually identified more projects than money. Hands up, what does that mean? Reallocation from internal resources, that's all that is. Well, actually, in this particular case, it was from another program. Okay, INAC, they don't run this way. They have loads and loads of money that they're putting out to reserves, but they're not managing each individual project in this way. They manage groups or themes or asset classes. So they're in the process of recutting their entire reporting process so that they can start measuring on a project-by-project basis. And it's not only us that's asked them for it, apparently PCO has as well. CMHC, most of that money is transfers to other levels of government, and it's all done on an accrual basis. So on a cash basis before year end, it looks like nothing's gotten out the door. In reality, and I just got the figures in last week, in reality, all the money's gotten out the door. All the agreements were signed, everything is, but again, they've been running this for years and years and years. There's nothing magical here. It's just we're asking for it in a different format to fit within our analytical framework. Oh yeah, a couple other little cool things here. So, employment and social development, you'll see that, again, very few projects identified for the money because it's all program money. So it's grants, contributions to programs for training, for skills development. These aren't, housing projects or sewer projects. I'll skip the oops and I'll come back to that. Procurements, Shared Services Canada. It's interesting, they nailed it right to the penny because they're procurements, they're not projects. So they were given a bunch of money basically to pay for the contracts they'd already signed. Is that an infrastructure plan? Yeah, you could argue that it is. National Defense, National Defense, I put that little quote there, no lapse here. They've reallocated some money. Folks at National Defense tell me, the only way we get measured on our performance now is by our lapse. So if we lapse a lot, then we're perceived to not be performing. Is that fair? You make up your own mind. I'm not entirely convinced. So I thought I'd, throw them a little bone here and say, hey, you guys are just, you're shooting the lights out on this one. What's oops? That's money that was set aside in the framework that Treasury Board was supposed to allocate, but hasn't. Okay, it's $879 million. When I pointed that out to Treasury Board, that was the response I got. So I thought I would categorize it that way. Now that money may now have been reallocated within the FISC. I don't know, I'm still waiting to find out. But when I'm asked to present data to Parliament, I present data to Parliament. Okay, so they know there's $897 million that's just kind of floating around in the ether with nothing attached to it. You know what I think it's for? Wasn't there something about a capital program review launched in Budget 2017? Anyway, that's my own speculation. I could be wrong. This is what this thing looks like, the NIL looks like. I wanted to show this to you because it's a mess, right? So how do you present this to Parliament? So on the very left side, you have the budget theme, starting on the bottom, investing in green infrastructure, building social community infrastructure, all the way to the top, other infrastructure investments. In the middle are the 38 budget measures that are listed in Budget 2016, and on the right are the budget allocations versus projects identified. Okay, so that's when you're putting your arms around it, this is what it looks like. Does it tell you very much? Not really. It just tells you that it's big and messy and it's hard to track. But we still need to come up with some way to pronounce on the effectiveness of this program. And luckily, the government gave us a little bit of a hook on that. So in Annex 2, which I'm going to look up here on my laptop, Annex A2.2, Value of Budget Measures and Economic Impacts. So there are a couple lines in there, and they say, okay, we expect housing investments to total $1.4 billion over the 2-year period, and we expect infrastructure investments to total about $11 billion over the 2-year period. So that's one. And then we have this thing in economics called fiscal multipliers. And fiscal multipliers is a fairly imperfect but an attempt to measure the fiscal impact of a particular economic or budget fiscal measure, the economic impact of a fiscal measure. So fiscal measure could be a tax cut, could be increased spending, or any combination thereof. Housing investment measures were teed up to be a multiplier of 1, which means for every dollar you put in as a spending dollar, you get an extra dollar in economic boost, and 1.5 in the second year. And infrastructure investment, we were going to looking at, finance said we expect 0.9, and then we expect 1.4 in the second year. So usually because they're trying to take into account the fact that the first year of the rollout's going to be a little slower, the second year it should be a lot faster. So that's where we hung our hat, okay? And I know we're on webcam, so I'm trying to be careful how I say this, but when we're dealing with multipliers, multipliers translate into notional jobs. At the end of the day, it's a fairly imperfect measure, but it is all that we have. And we want to be careful not to get too carried away. But what our finding was, given the fact that the timeliness of the money flow, of the cash flow, was lagging, therefore, the economic impacts are going to lag as well. Okay, so instead of the full impact that was teed up in Budget 2016, we discounted it, in this case, by 31%. So what does that translate to in a jobs thing? So the budget was hoping for 43,000 new jobs, jobs created from an economic point of view in the first year. And that wasn't all due to infrastructure, maybe 20% of that was due. So you're talking about, a very small adjustment to the economic the forecasted economic impact. But the message is clear. There is always a lag on these things. And if you're trying to present an economic impact, it's good to have somebody around to sort of do a double check and say, you know, last time you tried this, there was a lag. You're trying it again, guess what? There's a lag. So that's the finding. And I say down there, if people will just read our reports once in a while, like I said, in 2010 we found not exactly 31%, but I think it was about 29 or 28 and change. So it's useful to have this sort of information. It'd be useful in the work that you guys do now and will continue to do. So when eventually ministers in Parliament are asked to make decisions, they can look back and say, hey, what happened last time? It's not exactly the same program, but it's similar. What happened last time? We can plan accordingly. Okay. The other neat little thing that we're going to work on, I haven't got the data yet, is this little idea of the planned contributions and actually trying to capture the money flows and trends. So this is neat because, and this is going back to 2010, ISF, this was the original plan over the 2 years. It was a nice, beautiful S-curve. Every project was starting April 1st, 2009, and every project would finish by March 31st of 2011. It was amazing. The data was so clean. It was beautiful. And then we started asking for progress reports. Oops. So what does this represent as those curves move? Can anybody just tell by looking at the curves what that might mean? Okay. Right. Project slip. Ooh, big surprise. Ever tried renovating a bathroom? Does it always happen on time? Try renovating a street. Try installing streetcars. Try building an LRT system. You know, things never go wrong. We don't have sinkholes, right? That doesn't happen. Yeah, this happens. But what I find really interesting on this graph is how, despite the fact that projects delay or slip, everything still finishes on time. Anyway, what we did with that, just on the side, is we did a lapse analysis, and we said, okay, based on 4 quarters of reporting, we're seeing a certain trend in delay. We figure you're going to lapse 25% of the money. And what happened, that same day that we announced that afternoon, the government decided to extend the program. I don't think it had anything to do with us specifically. I think they knew this internally, but Parliament didn't know unless we were there to tell them. So there is an appetite for the performance story. A little bit of data can actually tell you a lot. The weakness, I think, here is that there's not a lot of performance metrics out there against which to measure results. So I wanted to throw out a few questions, a few comments, a few sort of observations. The OAG did a look at the Economic Action Plan, and it's always difficult to evaluate stimulus programs because you don't know what the counterfactual is. You don't know what would have happened had you not done stimulus. So you can only guess at that or model it. And there are some models. This was yours, Tom. You wanted me to put this in there, the policy and results. Okay, so how is evidence being applied? And I think the most important thing is for parliamentary oversight. You know, how much is too much? And depending on the level of your audience, you're going to have internal managers that need a lot of detail, and you're going to have more senior managers that aren't going to want that, and you're going to have parliamentarians whose focus really, between you and I, is their fiduciary obligation to hold the government to account, but also to be able to explain to their constituents how these programs affect them. So just keep that in mind as you're working through. And I think we have some time for a few questions.
Well, speaking of the infrastructure plan, our own LRT here is built by a team of Spaniards with a digging machine that travels from Moscow to Buenos Aires, because it's innovative technology that we didn't get to develop at home. How does that factor into your idea of economic impact if it goes all to, foreign in a global economy?
It's a great question. And I'm so lucky to be a PBO, and I don't actually have to say, here's what I'm going to do about it, right? That's not what we do. I would say, absolutely, that stuff needs to be captured. And there needs to be some articulation of that, in my opinion, when the government puts forward a budget with specific objectives as to how some of these ideas are going to be captured. And I'm told that it's in the works. And, that may not be an area we get into. as PBO because we're a small staff, but absolutely a valid measurement. I'm going to answer your question a little differently. We're doing some work now on ships. We're building these ships in Canada. We know what the premium is to build these ships in Canada versus buying them off a shipyard overseas. But because we're able to get in the detail of how a ship is built and the labor and the equipment, we can actually assess a foreign content component to the ship because a lot of the stuff we don't do in Canada. So there are ways to get at, I think, some of the things that you're talking about.
But it would influence the multiplier you use in the economic benefit. If it's one way or the other, you should capture that with your multiplier, no?
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm thinking how we would do that, and I'll put it aside, but I think it's a good idea. I would be interested in learning more about how we can do that sort of thing.
2 quick points. One, you're looking at the spending to budget to get all the money spent on time. And one of the issues that I have at work is, well, I'll give you an analogy. I'm given $50 to go shopping, and I'm giving a list of things to buy, like milk and butter and bread, and I come home with a case of beer. My wife looks at me, and I say, hey, I'm back on time within 2% of my budget. And then she's happy. So if we're just pushing money out the door to spend everything on time, is that the best metric for providing value for money? The second question is, we put a lot of money into building new infrastructure, but then there's a price tag associated to maintaining it over time. And if we just get the cost to build something, and we don't have the funds to maintain it, are we actually better off? So one is the spending to, is our infrastructure as a result of all these billions actually better in the country than before?
Cool.
Or do we have too much and we actually need less of it that's better maintained is another way, another strategy of dealing with some of the issues. Thank you.
So you're asking the fundamental question, which is how much is enough, right? And to know that, you need to know, in an infrastructure basis, what's out there, what is the current stock, and the quality of the stock of the infrastructure, and what is required to bring it to a certain level of performance or acceptability or quality, and then how much is it to keep it at that level. And we don't have any of that. The only thing that we have right now is, and I'm saying we as a country, we have right now is we have a report undertaken by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities who own most of the, municipalities own most of the infrastructure, public infrastructure in Canada, who do this infrastructure assessment I think it's every 5 years. And what do? They ask the cities, they ask the engineers to say, okay, give me an idea, expert opinion, what's the quality of your infrastructure and what would you rate it as? Is it good, fair, poor, that sort of thing. So it's, as in costing, we call that subject matter expert or expert opinion. Some cities have pretty decent asset management systems, so they can be a little more concrete. StatsCan is in the process of developing a survey to try to get at exactly one of those points is, what does the stock look like? But it's not there right now. We talked to StatsCan a year and a half ago, or before the election, I guess 2 years ago, heard that they were doing something, heard infrastructure was interested, and we said, hey, we'll throw money in too. I mean, we don't have much, but we'd be very keen to see, because we think this is an important thing for us to be able to report back on. So I think what Matthew was referring to yesterday was there's a lot of work to be done to get the data to start measuring performance.
The question is, sounds like nothing has changed from past iterations of this sort of funding. Why doesn't government not seem to be able to front-end program the performance and performance metrics into these types of initiatives? And it goes on. In other words, why can't measurement requirements actually be made explicit at the front end of these approvals?
Okay, so
it's not from me, okay, but it's a great question coming from online.
And I have an answer for that, but it wouldn't be a PBO answer, it'd be a Peter Wellman answer, and I'm not sure it's, so I guess I want to be cautious about commenting on government policy. That's maybe more cautious than I have been. What's stopping it? Nothing's stopping it, but it's a lot of work. And when things haven't been going, there hasn't been activity on that area in terms of developing and insisting on performance metrics before a initiative is released or as an initiative is released, there's a fair bit of work to do to change that culture. I mean, let's be honest, budgets are policy documents. They aren't, you're not going to run your business based on what you see in Budget 2016. It's a policy document that articulates the priorities of the government and how much of the national treasure it intends to allocate towards those priorities. And it pretty much stops there. Performance metrics are required in Treasury Board submissions and in MCs. How those are made public, how those are used, how those are communicated is entirely within the purview of the government. And what I think our role as a PBO is to inform parliamentarians as to the importance of those, how it will make their jobs easier or more useful, informed decision-making from their point of view. And then they can insist on and they are there, they are positioned, they can insist on getting that information. So it usually, I'm not an economist, I've been hanging around a lot of them for a long time, and I'm learning it's all about incentives. So there are incentives in there for those metrics to surface and be used, they will come.
The question is, in order to benchmark, is there a comparison available of a similar project that happened abroad?
Okay. That is one of our key analytical tools is benchmarking. Because as far as we're concerned, and I was like this at TVS too, there's nothing that we do as a government or as a department or as a program that is entirely unique to that program, that government, or that department. And I will caveat that a little bit. As I do more and more work with Indigenous and Northern Affairs issues, there aren't as many benchmarks. It's a little bit of a different league. So I'll just leave it at that. With regards to this program, I mean, at the moment, you saw the mess, or not the mess, you saw the full Monty, which is, you could start looking at, and what we do is we'll start breaking that out and looking for benchmarks. So infrastructure, there are a lot of benchmarks. The World Bank's done a lot of work, IMF's done a lot of work. McKinsey has a really interesting study that looks at the most effective use of infrastructure dollars, and it looks at types of programs, and it looks at delivery, a whole raft of things. And that's going to be where we start to explore some of the pure, if you will, infrastructure projects that are largely being delivered by Infrastructure Canada, or not delivered necessarily, but certainly that program is. And hope to be able to make some sort of comment on that in time for the Senate's next request from us to update their report. On housing, there are certainly metrics. On education, there are certainly metrics and benchmarks. But a whole package like this, not really. You have to break it out, and that is definitely the way you start. As I said before, get your arms around what it is that's there. Start to look for comparables elsewhere. Start to look at their key performance indicators, their performance metrics, and see if you can apply some of those to the current situation.
The question is, if you try to picture yourself moving forward, so we are at the PPX Symposium 2022, what is your prediction? So what would be the outcome or the takeaway of this looking back? It's just a personal prediction, but...
So it would be, what would I like to see, or what do I expect to see?
How about that? How about what you would like to see?
I would like... I'm going to make government policy on the fly here. No, this is Peter Wellman. From a PBO point of view, I would like to be able to see some of these programs a little bit more narrowly tailored. I would like to see, for example, green water, wastewater. How do those investments that we've chosen, how are they going to contribute to economic productivity? What are the measures that you're using? Australia's done a lot of work in this area. New Zealand's done a lot of work in this area. Chile's done some great work in this area. They've tried to identify the key investments required to generate economic activity. And as I said before, I kind of call it outcome costing. So what are you looking for? If you're looking for improved productivity, how are you going to get there? Okay, maybe we need to build more roads to move people around so they can afford to live outside the expensive centers and still get to work. Maybe that's one way to do it. All right, so what are the best roads to build? How do we buy the land? How do we get those roads maintained? How much is that going to cost? And are there measures out there that can help us kind of guess as to what the expected outcome might be? And we have an idea what it's going to cost to get there using that particular plan. Something like that would be awesome. It's your job, though, not mine. Thank you.